a twin of Terra in the middle of nowhere. Legend has it the planet was discovered during the height of the Great Crusade, when legions of Astartes were claiming much of the galaxy for the Imperium of Man, a fabled era when the Emperor still walked among mortals. By then the Imperial Expeditionary Forces had claimed so many planets they only bothered to name the significant ones and simply tagged the rest with denominations. As an unassuming planet orbiting a far-off, non-strategic star system, this then newly discovered world would have been assigned a generic label and fated for obscurity if not for a discovery that its basic parameters were uncannily similar to the throne world. The planet was of similar size to Terra with almost equal amount of gravity and revolution length around its sun, and it even came with a single relatively large moon of similar size to Luna. In an administrative council meeting whose official records had long been lost, a member of the attendees had playfully proclaimed the lost twin of Terra had been found. That unusual statement prompted others to do a double take and ask, "Where?" "Nusquam," someone replied. "Planet Nusquam? Oh, wait." Literally meaning nowhere in High Gothic, the incident provoked a rare round of haughty laughter in an otherwise routinely dull meeting, and the name stayed till this day. It was early morning in the Nusquamese capital city of Asieslux, and I was entranced by its sight. On a busy street of the megapolis I stood as an observer as a tsunami of people flowed like human waves around me. Many thousands of light-years away from the cradle of humanity, people made up of ethnicities I neither knew nor recognized flourished under an alien sky. Over many thousand years of additional continuous evolution had subtly changed humanity in ways I could not properly pinpoint. Every face around me seemed more defined and sharpened in features than the crowd from old Earth. Despite the slight difference in appearance, like their ancestors, these people busied themselves with the hustling and bustling of daily life beneath the shadows of super skyscrapers, a scene I was familiar with. While the cityscape of Asieslux would put every modern city I knew to shame, it was considered underdeveloped compared to the notoriously ridiculous hive cities of the Imperium, where each literally housed billions of people. The rowdy city center at the ground level was crawling with endless streams of mundane vehicles, while the rich and powerful zipped around on levitating speeders overhead. The streets were dotted with countless business establishments, each filled to the brim with their patrons. Holographic sponsored messages looped endlessly at prime locations, while floating advertising contraptions of all kinds dominated the overhead airspace. Every usable space was either an advertisement or an imperial propaganda message, and I was dazzled by the whole ultra-metropolitical sight. In a way, I felt like a medieval person who was suddenly introduced to a modern 20th century city. Yet in this overwhelming spectacle I found myself attracted to a particular scene. In the sea of flowing humanity was a little girl who wore a bright jacket piggybacking on the shoulders of her supposed father. My attention was glued to her carefree smile until the pair disappeared around a corner. Then it dawned on me that my old self would never care for such a scene. Just who was looking at that, me or? It is me, or you. It is complicated. SYRINE's words rang again in my head. I felt a sense of nausea just thinking about that and recalled my psychic projection from the city center to a place closer to my body. The ground below me shifted and the crowd changed from workers rushing to work, to pilgrims gathered near the Sororitas Monastery's gate. I walked around and saw a bandaged Rutabaga giving a speech to a huge crowd beneath my statue. A squad of battle sisters provided basic security nearby. I stayed for a while and listened to his story, about how my random act of kindness had validated his actions, but soon decided to end the surveillance session after experiencing embarrassment from hearing his over-exaggerated praises. The sensation of having a body returned, and I opened my eyes to my current lodging, a nice room attached with a small living quarters inside the monastery cathedral located at one of the top towers. Beep. A servo skull floated over. My own personal servo skull, a gift from Cryptora passed to me by Kira. I was given the choice between a brand new, fully synthetic drone or one made with a real human skull, whose cranium was said to be retrieved from a favorite valet of his who had died gloriously in service to the Omnissiah. No prize for guessing my choice here. I named it Solace, the synthetic skull probe sidekick. With a flick of my mind, I connected to Solace and was updated on all the headlines of the major news channels. As the old saying goes, truth is the first casualty of war, and here was a world enslaved to a regime that was at war for 10,000 years. I was not even sure what I expected, but the truth spoke for itself. There were multiple major news channels and information portals, but none were telling the full or real story. The Imperium's information control machine was way ahead and in full control of the narrative, misdirecting and compartmentalizing events while dropping smoke screens over crucial details. There was no mention of the missing Astronomicon light nor the appearance of a new psychic beacon anywhere, despite the fact a huge silver beam on the horizon could be perceived whenever I went psychically active. Next, I turned my attention to Cryptora's excavation progress updates. The process had turned out to be more difficult than he anticipated. From the report, it seemed like it would need another few days for his teams to reach the buried entrance of the hidden vault. Progress had been severely hampered by complications of moving heavy breaching drills into position while complying to the demands of the sororitas on working on their sacred ground in the inner sanctum, the place that started it all. While I was very curious about the contents of the vault myself, deep down another part of me was dead worried of what we would, or would not find inside. I had tried to send my astral projection over, but this skill was still very new to me and the site proved too far for my amateurish control. In the end, I could only wait for the result. Would Cryptora withdraw his support for me if we found little to nothing useful inside? How should I navigate this messy and potentially cutthroat imperial politics now that the immediate threat was no more? You could say I am a worrywart, but my mind could not help but wonder about the future. It was still early in the morning, so I redid a mental recap of what happened yesterday. I became acquainted with the senior Primaris Psyche Jaime. The way she sort of freaked out when I imitated the psychic duo by bowing and calling her Mei Jie or elder sister Mei was low-key hilarious. We got along fine and I learned about her story of almost dying to a sudden surge of psychic powers after arriving here. She was saved by a medically induced coma and the help of having Zaki, the null boy, being nearby to stabilize her symptoms. I never knew you could use a pariah like that. After that, the rest of the day was spent on learning about the chaos taint vetting and purification processes. It was a mixture of theories, practices, rituals and pseudoscience, which I was able to distill into a simpler, more efficient process with insights that came to me naturally. At the end of the day, I was confident enough to request for trial runs. If everything went smoothly on the back end, I should be able to put my theories to the test later today. Feeling restless, I sat up from my bed and looked at the mirror on the wall. With my enhanced eyesight, the dim light of the room did little to obscure the reflection of a breathtaking girl staring back. My sight was locked onto the enchanting scene, but I soon felt like being judged by a demigoddess and had to look away. The sororitas had provided me with the best stuff in their powers, everything from accommodations to food was top quality. But truth be told, my life since waking up has been a total mess. Knowing neither hunger, thirst nor fatigue in the human sense, my daily life's rhythm went totally out of whack. Baseline, fundamental questions like should I eat and drink normally was a mystery. I was also dead worried about the non-existent need to frequently visit a toilet. The necessity to examine all these mundane issues closely made me feel like a newborn with an incredible sense of uneasiness. I got up from my bed and walked towards my only possessions in the room, a collection of huge luggages in a corner which was brought over from the fortress. I had since been taking stock of their contents in order to find out more information about myself. As far as I could tell, simple-looking white robes were the most abundant item in the collection, more than enough for me to wear daily on a washing rotation. Guess these would be my default attire, like the black turtleneck sweatshirts for a certain infamous billionaire in my time. There was a set of god-tier quality self-grooming tools that was identified by Analytica to be made of adamantium alloy, one of the strongest substances known to the Imperium and typically used to produce high-grade military gear like the Space Marine Terminator plates. I reckon these tools might outlast some unfortunate empires. Then there were some tubes of ultra-concentrated food that looked like toothpaste, some space-age toiletries, bottles of perfumes, random trinkets and pairs of footwear. As I was going through my stuff, a familiar sensation crept up. It was the feeling of an acquainted psyker trying to contact me via telepathy. I accepted the request to converse. Plus morning, Lady SYRINE. Plus good morning, Zali. Plus my lady, sorry to disturb you this early in the morning, but Throne Agent Herlin Dyer will like to see you shortly for an urgent briefing. ETA 40 minutes. Plus noted, thank you. Plus. Herlin Dyer Winson, the quiet and nice-looking brunette who more or less functioned like a secretary to Inquisitor Thaberus, would be arriving soon. While she always looked professional and reserved, I remembered seeing her go batshit crazy when Interrogator Amel got killed in a vision. It got me curious, as I was not sure how far one could trust information glimpsed from a simulated scenario. I hurriedly washed up and prepared myself, which admittedly was little to no work thanks to the passive ability of Regardless. Even with my superhuman perception, I struggled to find minute flaws from my reflection in the washroom mirror. Herlin Dyer arrived soon after, looking tactical yet elegant in her dark inquisitorial attire. She was flanked by two people. One was a professional-looking gunman armed with a lasgun, while the other a hooded scribe. The scribe held up a device and did some scanning around before nodding to Herlin Dyer. She nodded back, left her escorts behind and walked into my room, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. Lady SYRINE, morning. Herlin Dyer smiled and bowed. As she did so, a pleasant and uplifting scent drifted over. Perfume? As I wondered about it, a flurry of information appeared in my mind. Scent analysis: aldehydes, neroli, bergamot, lemon, iris, jasmine, rosa, orris root, lily, civet, sandalwood, musk, amber, vetiver, vanilla, patchouli, ethanol, androstenone. Just when I thought that was way too much information, further details were still coming in. Wait, was that the scent of a man hidden beneath all the layers? Is she really having a relationship with the interrogator as suggested by the vision? Morning, Herlin Dyer, I said while doing a double take on the pretty Throne Agent, and she eyed me back curiously. While I normally would never busy myself with the personal life of others, in this case I yearned to learn if the vision was correct. I decided to probe and casually asked, by the way, where is Interrogator Amel? Caught off guard, Herlin Dyer's thoughts leaked for a fraction of a second, and I caught glimpses of her memories about the passionate session she had with Amel from yesterday night. It was so abrupt I almost broke character, but was saved by an old friend. Regardless, action override. From my deadpan surface reaction, it took an instance for Herlin Dyer to dismiss the notion that I had any interest in her lover. She put her professional smile back on and said, "The interrogator is on another mission to root out the cults. Why the sudden interest in his whereabouts? My dear, I am so sorry about the privacy intrusion. Let me make it up to you by making your day." I shook my head and smiled. Nothing in particular. I had an epiphany because you looked extra charming today. It just dawned on me that you and the interrogator would make a nice-looking couple together. Herlin Dyer looked shocked for a second before breaking into a hearty giggle. Lady SYRINE, I never knew you could be such a sweet talker. Unfortunately, time is scarce and we have to get down to business. By the Inquisitor's order, I am here to quickly brief you on the latest developments. I nodded and she started her briefing. Your request for the test candidates for purification trials have been expedited. For security purposes, we had prioritized those who were exhibiting extreme withdrawal symptoms after their metaphysical exposure. They will be arriving here later today. Can you tell me more about these symptoms? While individual reactions with sudden exposure to warp entities in close proximity vary a lot from one another, these are the individuals who practically became vegetables due to extreme shock. Such patients will usually just wither away if left alone, but more often than not be administered with the Emperor's Peace to prevent possession risks. The Emperor's Peace is a fancy term for euthanasia. So basically they are just people waiting to die. I nodded, somewhat relieved by a selfish notion that I could do no worse for them. We have the means and methods to treat cases like these, just not the capacity to handle this many people. Herlin Dyer clarified. I was briefed on the method yesterday. I nodded in reply. On paper, the Inquisition had 3 psychers versus the workload of 20,000 people. That was even before considering the slow and archaic procedures involved if we do it by the book. Even a humanist like me had to admit mass execution looked like a logical solution for such a hopeless-looking scenario. There might be a way out of this, but I had to test my theory first. Up next, the church is sending their representative over. Herlin Dyer said while passing me her data slate. Junior preacher Malin Hadmeyer, a local citizen of 20 Terran Standard years old, recently sanctioned as a preacher. We had gone through her background and found little notes of interest. A new preacher? I looked at the profile picture on the device. Defying my expectation, she was surprisingly decent looking. It appears so. Her family was of average standing without powerful connections. You could say the church had sent over a nobody, which is unexpected considering this is a very sought-after position. Why do you think that is the case? We had gone through various theories. In conclusion, either the church wanted to avoid heavy infighting or they are sending over a sacrificial pawn. Due to the extremely high-profile nature of your case, it should be the first. Internally, I shivered at the unspoken implications on the latter. What will happen if I decline their representative? I asked while handing back Herlin Dyer her data slate. She shrugged. They probably will just elect a new person. I got a hunch if I refused this candidate, they might fall back to their usual demographic of grumpy or saintly old men. By the way, Governor Cartolina will be visiting shortly. May I act as your assistant in the meantime? Herlin Dyer asked. It felt strange and I was still very new to being a big deal. But obviously I needed all the help when it came to real imperial politics, so I nodded. Much obliged. Please take care of me. Cartolina arrived soon after. The impeccable timing solidified my impression that all the VIPs on the planet were under tight inquisitorial surveillance. I was seated in a meeting room when Cartolina stepped through the door. The governor was led in by Wellmanor and flanked by multiple advisors of her own, looking immaculate in her highly ornate and decorative formal outfit. Cartolina wore a mainly purple regalia made from the finest-looking materials, lined with golden embroidery and embellished with precious metals and gems. A golden sash on her body acted as placeholder for various medals. Highly tailored, the regalia fit her perfectly. Meanwhile, I was back on my comfortable, simple-looking sleeved white robe, and the contrast between our attire stuck out like a sore thumb. Not sure about protocols, I simply stood up as she entered the room. I really need the help of an etiquette expert. My lady. The governor greeted, her eyes widened upon seeing me after all these days. She looked a bit pale and I sensed a mix of intense emotions bubbling beneath her controlled visage. Governor, how are you doing? I asked. By the throne's blessings, I am doing great. Pardon me, what I am about to request is against standard protocol, but may I have a private moment with you? Totally at a loss of what would be appropriate, I glanced over at Herlin Dyer as she returned a do-as-you-see-fit look. Well, at least Cartolina was not considered to be a threat to me by the Inquisition. Very well, please give us some space. Everyone else complied. Soon it was only the two of us left inside the meeting room. So, Cartolina? Instead of replying, to my surprise, Cartolina knelt down before me before stating what was on her mind. By his blessings and your holy work, my world, my home and the homes of countless new squammies were saved from the brink of damnation. No words can convey my gratitude and the gratitude of my people to the throne and you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Cartolina said, her voice cracking with raw emotions. Before I could say anything, she continued, and finally, thank you for being alive and well. It worried me to death that you may never wake up from your injuries. Then she started crying. While Cartolina looked like a fine lady in her prime, I knew she was well over 70 years old and could not push the mental image of a crying grandmother out of my mind. This is embarrassing. On the other hand, I was reminded of the fact my actions did save a whole world, a fact that I seemed to be trying to forget for some reasons. Then I sensed her thoughts on how she viewed me. Savior. The governor was viewing me like she was a desperate damsel in distress, hanging from the edge of a failing skyscraper and looking at a superhero flying in. Being a ruler of a planet and all, I guessed it was very rare for her to come face to face with any peers, let alone a person who could potentially solve her problems. I let her cry for a while before leaning down to hold her hands. On skin contact, more of her emotions ran through me. I sensed her anxiety about the future, her shame on losing the control of her domain, and the pain of losing family members. Was she ever close to Cathan? Catalina, please rise. My lady, before that, can I ask some questions? What do you want to know? Why has the Emperor's light ceased reaching us? What was that psychic beacon you lit, and what will happen to my world? Catalina asked. By now her tears were running like waters burst forth from a failed dam. I felt the shivering of her smooth hands. This was a person who stood at the apex of an imperial world, almost losing everything twice, and now faced a future of uncertainties. I can't answer all your questions and have no plans to do any changes beyond the necessary. In truth, I had no plans at all, but that was beside the point. So what comes next for Nusquam? She asked again. For a moment I considered telling her about my memory loss, but decided against burdening her with more reasons to be anxious. As for what comes next, I guess it depends on what we will find inside the vault. Vault? Well, I can't tell you much, but after that we continued to talk and chatted away. Well, it ended up with her talking most of the time while I avoided giving out any critical information. The topics changed from the state of the planet to seemingly random personal stuff. It felt like a mix between a friendly chat between friends and a therapeutic session for her. Eventually we stopped and Catalina freshened up her makeup and expressed her gratitude again before leaving. As soon as the governor left the room, Herlindaya joined me again. She eyed me inquisitively and I shrugged. Seemed like she needed someone to talk to. I told her about the vault. Was that wise? Considering the governor will know about that sooner or later, it is fine. Please consult us beforehand on revealing important information to anyone in the future. It was then Herlindaya's comm bead beeped and she answered it. Through my transhuman hearings I heard the conversation. Herlindaya. It was Zali the Psyker. Yes? That new preacher from the ecclesiarchy is here. I lightly probed her mind. No issues found. Affirmative. Herlindaya turned to me. That preacher is here. Should I meet her? I asked. It is up to you. If you do, please remember to keep confidential information from her. I remembered Herlindaya mentioning that rejecting Malin here might result in the ecclesiarchy replacing her with a random old man. Bad cardinal or not, even when Rabute Gulaman became the Lord Commander of the Imperium with all his legit powers and legions of space marines, he also had to entertain and keep the church around. Guess I had little choice in this matter unless I prefer to swap the new lady priest with an old man. Send her in. I nodded. A while later Wellmanor led a young lady in preacher attire into the meeting room. She matched the profile I saw earlier. The newcomer's face lit up the moment she saw me. I effortlessly picked up her thoughts that were broadcasting like an open-air concert. So beautiful. Malin's mind screamed while she froze still, eyes locked onto me. Wellmanor waited for the young preacher to introduce herself, and when it was not forthcoming she lightly cleared her throat, snapping Malin out of it. Blessings of the throne upon you, I am Malin Hadmea, designated representative of the Adeptus Ministorum. She said nervously, formed her Aquila sign with her hands and bowed. Did the ecclesiarchy really just send a total noob over, amnesia from injury? Malin exclaimed, her outrage, raw emotions of surprise and shock boiling over from her loud mind. Not even a few minutes into our first meeting and the new Adeptus Ministorum representative was already showing herself to be an unorthodox candidate. By the throne, is that true, sister? Breaking what I suspected to be standard etiquette, the young preacher stood up and directly eyed Wellmanor while demanding validation of my condition. Yes, that much is true. The scholar replied reluctantly with her eyes downcast. I sensed Wellmanner's mind leaking sentiments of guilt and shame for the sororitas' apparent shortcomings. In truth, it was not their fault. The sisters were taking one for me to conceal my great secret, one that I could never share with anyone. As for me, I was keeping my mouth shut. The less I talked, the less holes there would be in our story. As far as the matter was concerned, Maylin as the representative of the church was on a need-to-know basis, and we did not even tell her my supposed memory loss was from a previous injury. Maylin turned to me, her expression a mix of pity and mortification. Then she slowly walked towards me, which should be another breach of etiquette, before reaching out to grab onto my hands. Now this was definitely a breach of etiquette, as I noticed Herlindaya raising an eyebrow. This will not stand. I will notify the church and we will find the best treatment to rectify this. Maylin proclaimed, emotions of righteous protectiveness pouring out like an erupted volcano. In her eyes I had become a victim of tragic circumstances. We have sought the best treatment available and there have been improvements to her condition. Wellmanner replied defensively. But Lady SYRINE still has not regained her memories, right? I demand a detailed report on how it all happened. If it was due to the negligence of the Adepta, I will petition to move the Saint candidate into our care due to incompetence on your side. Maylin released my hands to point an accusatory finger at Wellmanner. That statement hit a spot and the two of them soon got into a heated argument. I watched helplessly from the sidelines as the verbal warfare escalated, then Herlindaya, who was reading her data slate, leaned over and whispered, "The test candidates have arrived, Palatine Alisaya is handling the transfer." Just in time. I looked at the quarreling ladies and decided it was better to just get on with my plans for today. "Thank you. Let's go," I said and stood up, surprising the spatting pair. "My lady, where are you going?" Wellmanner asked. "To test if my theory could work to save some people. The test candidates we mentioned before have arrived," I answered. "But your condition?" Maylin stammered but was unable to complete her sentence. I looked at the astonished preacher and suddenly thought of a cool response. I smiled and said, "While I may have lost most of my memories, I have not forgotten my duties." On that fateful day, Trooper Ignatham's worldview collapsed on the battlefield. The trooper first saw the supposed invincibility of the mighty Northern Grand Army he belonged to getting totally humiliated, then after a day of twists and turns he witnessed Supreme Commander Lord General Luther turned into a mist of blood and gore by a gargantuan creature from out of this world. Ignatham was in the front row seats when it all went down. The trooper saw the nightmarish warp spawn up close, like a prehistoric man who suddenly encountered a legendary apex predator. It was an overwhelmingly shocking experience. Being a trooper, Ignatham was conditioned for combat shock, but this time the threat he perceived had extended to his entire species and it proved too much. As a resident of a fringe civilized world far away from most of the galactic horrors, demons were but vague concepts to him until that very moment. The demons are real. Ignatham's terrified mind was taken to the edge, all training failing him. While the gigantic demon never showed him the slightest attention, for a microsecond Ignatham saw its eyes and it shook his soul. The sheer level of hatred and malice pouring forth from those glowing orbs convinced him they needed supernatural help. Ignatham did not raise his trusted lasgun nor did he attempt to flee. What was the point? Throne preserves us, this foe is beyond us. His mind searched frantically for any possible solution, silly but plausible notions flashed before his mind, looking for a way out. The God Emperor was too far away on holy terror and confined to his golden throne, his angels of death were not around. Hold on, if demons are real, then those stories about saints must be real too. Maybe if they had an anointed saint blessed with his power, wait, was that singing lady a saint? But she was on the other side and might not extend a helping hand. We are doomed. Ignatham's jumbled mind concluded. He lost his mental strength, dropped to his knees and began laughing uncontrollably as the pandemonium of madness continued around him. That was where his conscious memory ended that day. For a while now, the young trooper could not remember anything nor focus his mind. His name, his life, His aspirations and everything else about him felt like a barely perceivable whisper in the air. Everything was hazy. In his altered state of mind he found himself floating in space. At first numberless unblinking stars surrounded him, but soon they started disappearing, leaving an unsettling dark void. Surrounded by total darkness, he came to the realization he was not alone. There in the lightless depths a feeling of something truly colossal stirred. The trooper's terrified consciousness was sinking towards the darkness. Deeper and deeper his mind dove until it was hanging at the very edge of the abyss. An eternal void was staring at him, and he sensed a disturbing resonance coming from an unimaginable distance away. When he listened hard enough, it sounded a lot like cruel laughter. Feeling trapped in the worst case of sleep paralysis, he wanted to scream, to wake up from this living nightmare. His consciousness hung helplessly at the edge of sanity while staring at the beckoning void. After holding on for an indeterminable amount of time, he felt the final reserves of his inner strength dissipating, his feeble mental fortitude unable to hold against the darkness forever. Finally, his last ounce of strength left him, and he screamed in his mind as he was about to drop into the proverbial cosmic abyss. He felt the prospect of facing an eternity of damnation. A lifetime of conditioning kicked in, and he instinctively cried out to the one and only entity in the galaxy who could offer salvation. Throne. Emperor. Have mercy on my soul. The void replied in silence as he cried in despair. Just as the young trooper was about to totally lose it, a bright light burst into existence. He watched in bewilderment as the surrounding darkness was chased away by a warm golden light. Ignathum. Someone called from a distance. Ignathum? That sounded so familiar. Wait, that's my name, I am Ignathum. Suddenly the heavy mental fog was lifted and he remembered everything. Stunned and surrounded by the bright light, he sensed a presence nearby and turned to it. Ignathum could not believe his eyes as a girl emerged from the brilliance. She wore a robe of the purest white, her face obscured by a blinding halo of divine radiance. Ignathum? The girl called his name again, her soft and gentle voice seemed to echo to eternity in this strange space. Ignathum struggled to pick out facial features as her impression shifted every time he focused on it. For a fleeting moment he caught glimpses of his long-deceased mother, but she looked so young and beautiful here. Ignathum felt no fear, a feeling from the bottom of his heart informed him the shining figure meant no harm. So this is the afterlife? Ignathum was sure of it. He started crying and reached out with his hand. Show me, he thought, show me the afterlife. It was working. I felt a deep sense of relief as what seemed to be warp-taint residue was burnt away from the patient by my halo's intensity in close proximity. While I was still totally clueless on how any of this worked, there was no arguing with the result. The patient, a young trooper from the rebel faction, was seated across me with our faces less than 2 feet apart. My halo was on full blast, the psychic energy holding a hint of the Emperor's unique version of divinity driving away the corruption. Wilmina, Herlindia, Malin, Zali, Alisaya and a small squad of sisters were watching attentively nearby. Earlier when Malin saw my halo in person for the first time, she lost her composure and was moved to tears. This light is so divine. Her mind screamed while the sororitas only emitted deep silent reverence. Why is her mind so loud? I wondered for a second before deciding to focus on finishing the task at hand. Ignathum. I called his name. The trooper started moaning softly like a person waking from a deep sleep. His once totally off-focus eyes started training on me, a hint of comprehension showed on his face as tears started flowing down his cheek. He was coming around. Ignathum? I called again. Instead of answering me, he feebly raised his right hand. Trooper Ignathum. Still no reply, but someone had definitely come back home in that previously listless body. His hand slowly started to reach out as if trying to caress my face. From my perspective his speed might as well be a bin sprouting, so I ignored it. The majority of my attention was spent closely observing the retreating darkness in his body. My theory and method needed to be confirmed. Thousands of lives were riding on this. I looked closer. engrossed in the incredible sight of the minuscule warp residue inside him dissolving like dew meeting the afternoon sun. That would do it. With this therapy we can. It was then something entered into my peripheral field at high speed. By the time I realized what was happening, there were few good options left. Wham! The sound of a solid strike rang out in the room as Ignatham's face was hammered by the back end of a bolter. The trooper was still falling back from his chair when two battle sisters rushed over to him. In the next second, Alasaya had stepped in front of me while the poor trooper was about to be pummeled further. "Stop it. He was just coming around," I called out. The sisters froze on my command. Two of them were midway of laying into him with the butts of their bolters. A third sister had just switched off the safety of her bolter and was likely a moment away from discharging her weapon. That was close. It was partly my fault. I did not realize how serious the sororitas were about my protection. They must have taken the trooper's attempt to touch me as a form of assault. "Sisters, please stand down." "Thank you. Alasaya, it is fine." I gently pushed away the Palatine who was blocking my path and walked over to the downed trooper. He was in shock, holding up his hands to block further blows while breathing heavily from a bruised face. If it was not for me subtly pushing him at the last second to avoid maximum impact, he would have suffered at least a few broken teeth on top of that. I turned my halo off and squatted down for a better look at the trooper. He was glancing around nervously, looking confused. Imagine waking up from the worst hangover ever to a bunch of angry battle sisters gunbutting you. A part of me wanted to laugh out loud at the absurdity of his situation, but I kept my straight face and asked, "Have you awakened, trooper?" He nodded quickly. "Kindly introduce yourself." I asked for confirmation. He hesitated for a second before starting to talk, his voice weak and dry with insufficient hydration. "Trooper First Class Ignatham Heron of Squad Jahat, 2nd Platoon, 1st Battalion of the Northern Great Army, reporting for duty." "Ma'am," he said with a forced gusto before forming the Aquila sign while on the ground. "He seems fine now, please check on him," I said. "Well, we happen to have an expert here," Herlindia said before turning to Malin. "Preacher, you were involved in the faith validation process, correct? Could you do a preliminary check on this trooper?" Malin, who was still in a kind of trance upon witnessing what happened, snapped to attention after being addressed by an agent of the Inquisition. "Right, pass me his information and I can do that." As Malin started working, I went on a discussion with the others. "So how was that?" I asked. "Splendidly done, my lady. It would not have worked without your level of powers," Zali commented. "It is sustainable? Are you feeling drained?" Herlindia asked. "I think I can do it all day," I said after testing my reserves. "That is frankly absurd," Zali remarked pensively, making me wonder about my own psyche level. "If we are going to continue, I would suggest tying up the rest to prevent them from attempting anything." Alasaya chipped in, looking fiercely protective. A while later Malin reported that aside from feeling confused about his situation, everything seemed fine with the first test candidate. We went ahead with the rest and tied them up beforehand as Alasaya suggested. One by one the test candidates were freed from their vegetative state. The interesting bits were their myriad of reactions. Most nervously looked around while asking what had happened, a few cried out for their mothers, one asked if I was an angel to lead his soul to the Emperor. I pressed on, learning a little bit more about the process with each candidate and was gaining confidence until one uncooperative case. For this particular individual, the residual taint inside him seemed extraordinarily stubborn and did not dissipate with the same treatment process. I tried and tried until I decided to increase intensity by moving closer to the candidate. With our faces about 1 feet apart, my halo was practically engulfing him as I observed his condition. The last bit of warp residue retreated further but still did not dissolve, and just when I decided to move even closer to finish the job, the trooper suddenly lashed out with a blood-curdling scream and came biting at me with extraordinary speed. Time slowed down just enough for me to get a proper look at everything, including the young man's eyes. In the windows to his soul I saw an abyss, nothing but madness glinted in his iris. Startled and propelled by self-preservation, I reacted by jerking back while delivering a hand chop with maximum force at his throat. While the man seemed deadly fast in his altered state, I proved to be faster and my attack connected first despite striking out later. In slow motion I saw my hand sink into his neck and cut right through, pushing through layers of elastic skin, flesh, nerves, arteries and bones. I experienced each layer's distinct texture and density as my hand crushed into them until a jumbled-up organic mess formed and stopped me from decapitating him outright. The brutal momentum flung the crazed trooper like a rag doll to the side, splattering the room with a shower of crimson blood before he dropped to the floor in a literal bloody mess. In the next moment Alysia was shielding in front of me again, shouting orders while another sister dragged me back, away to supposed safety. While I could have easily freed myself from the feeble human restraint, mentally I was in a shock and just went with the flow. Already 2 more sisters had stepped forward, their bolters trained at the fallen man. But the trooper remained motionless, the only movement was the spreading of his blood on the floor and the dripping of the same blood from my hand. Alerted by the commotion, Maylin, who was working next door, appeared, her expression turned to horror upon witnessing the gruesome scene. For some reason the only thing on my mind was my first encounter with the grimdark universe as a classic computer game I picked up. On the back of its box was a quote printed in a large and thick font stating, "Thou shalt kill." While my mind became a numbing mess, the expected adrenaline rush from such an event did not occur. Instead, the sense of utter calmness I felt, as if I just swatted an annoying insect, shocked me. The dripping of warm blood from my hand eventually refocused my jittering attention. I held up my hand for a closer look, found it covered in blood but otherwise unscathed despite cutting through a man's neck. "I am sorry for the mess. Please excuse me while I go clean up." Not waiting for a response, I departed and headed towards the nearest washroom that was registered in my memory. Luckily for me, hand sanitizing liquid was still a common enough feature in the grim darkness of the far future. Alone in a water closet, I stood and watched like a zombie as the last traces of blood on my hand was washed away by running tap water. I just killed someone with my hand. Yes, I killed people before. In the final battle of the Civil War, some of my actions had directly led to the demise of rebel personnels. But those kills had been done remotely, using machines from far, far away. This was my first melee kill, up close and personal. Thanks to my Primarch-level memory retention, I could still clearly recall how my dainty hand went through the man's muscular neck as if human flesh had the consistency of tofu while neck bones were little more than brittle, hollowed-out twigs. For some reason I also could not help but notice that despite the massive spillage of blood, not a single drop of the sanguine liquid managed to cling onto my robe. Just what sort of cloth is this? I ran, Analytica, on my own robe. The reading came back, material, superior eternal silk. Totally no idea what material was that. After washing my hand for the 3rd time, I rinsed it dry and muttered a silent curse as the faint smell of blood still lingered. Then I realized that probably only transhumans could detect such low levels of the scent. It was like that time when no, not me, SYRINE escaped from beneath the Imperial Palace. What did she do back then to get rid of scent trails when cornered by the Custodes? I raised my hand for a closer inspection while recalling the memory, then almost reflexively my psychic energies flexed for the briefest moment and a minuscule amount of power was discharged onto my hand. In the next moment invisible warp fire fluttered and burned through the surface of my hand, ionizing everything on top of the skin and obliterating any last hint of the blood. I was stunned by the immediate result. It seemed I just discovered another weird application of my powers. As I left the water closet and opened the door to the outside, 2 battle sisters guarding nearby snapped to attention. It took a moment for me to comprehend that even just for going to the sink to wash my hands I had elite bodyguards armed with bolters looking over me. When I returned to the room, it was filled with people doing some sort of crime scene investigation. Everyone turned to me as I stepped in and the atmosphere felt extremely tense. Some of the people's surface thoughts even came through to me. Throne, this is bad. One of them was thinking. Heads might roll for this. Another person echoed mentally. That made me nervous. Technically, I just committed murder in front of everyone despite the fact that the man attacked first. As I pondered on the situation, Alysia approached me with a grave face. That felt extra strange as she seldom displayed such an expression towards me. That alone and the grim resolve I felt emanating from her made me even more nervous. Wait, really? Am I in trouble for this? Just as I was contemplating what to say, to my surprise Alysia knelt down in front and started apologizing. Holy daughter, we are extremely sorry for our inefficient vetting process that let a heretic get so close and attack you. I will be personally taking responsibility for this transgression. The Palatine said softly, and despite her neutral tone I could feel the intense emotions of regret and shame she was keeping a tight leash on. Heretic? The sight of Alysia, a well-mannered, pretty and extremely capable girl deep in remorse kneeling in front of me broke my male-centric heart. I reached down, held onto her shoulders and said, "Don't say that. Show me what you have discovered." She obliged and walked me to the mess I had created, the small crowd parting before us. There, in a pool of dried blood, was the almost decapitated corpse, his head turned to the side on the floor, eyes lifeless and mouth opened wide by a squatting Sister Hospitaller next to him. At first I was not sure what was being shown to me, but then my spine chilled upon seeing what Alysia had meant. Inside the right cheek of the dead man was a sizable scar of sorts that formed the shape of 8 arrows in a radial pattern. It was the mark of chaos, symbol of the great enemy. This was the first time I saw this symbol in this universe, and it occurred in such a gruesome manner. Back in my world, the symbol of chaos served little more than a mark of rebellion or the dedication to a fandom. Here, it looked like it had a life of its own, with real tangible powers. It took a moment before I deduced stopping our work here was akin to conceding to the enemy. I turned to the throne agent, Herlin Dyer. How many more candidates to go? 7. Please guide the sisters on what to do with this. We will continue to work with the rest, I said. After getting a glimpse of what was at stake, I fully intended to finish the job.